Hashem. How could you pass this around? This is for you to read later, just details of the story.
So I actually did go to this one in this.
Okay. What?
I'm just gonna mute
And this, if you don't mind. Thank you. So today is, if you haven't heard, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the first day in Kislev. In the month of Kislev, in the Hasidic calendar, is a very special month. And it's actually referred to as the Hasidic month, a Hasidic month, which means there's a lot of Hasidic history in this month. And the sheet that I gave out, I'll just go over briefly the special dates in this month that are related to the development and establishment of the Hasidic movement and different aspects that happened. So Rosh Chodesh Kislev is the day we're celebrating, and I'm going to explain what the significance of this day is. The second day of Kislev is also something which needs more explanation, which we will in the very near future. But in 1987, there was an incident with the Rebbe's library, which there was someone challenging the library and challenging it in court and wanting to take away the Rebbe's library books, which is, like I said, a story in itself. Then it went to the federal court, and the court ruled that it all belongs to the Rebbe. No one else has the right to it. And the day that the books were returned, many books were taken away. The days that they were returned was on the second day of Kislev. That became a significant Hasidic day. The 9th of Kislev, this is the day, you have the dates in 1773. That's when the Mittel Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad, was born. We know that birthdays are very significant. In 1827, 54 years later, the Mittel Rebbe passed away exactly on the same day, the 9th of Kislev. On the 10th of Kislev, 1826, which is a year earlier before his passing, the Mittel Rebbe was arrested, and his arrest was as a result of other Jews who informed the government and filed false accusations against him. The purpose was to stop the Hasidic movement. Unfortunately, it was coming not only from Jews, but from religious Jews, and they were under the impression that this is something that needs to be stopped. So he was arrested, he was in jail for a little bit over 2 months, and then went out of jail on the 10th of Kislev. So that's a day of celebration. The 14th of Kislev in 1928, that's the day that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin got married. The 19th of Kislev in 1772, that's the day that the Maggid Mezrich, who was the second Hasidic master, was nostalgic. That's the day that he passed on 19th of Kislev. And then in 1796, a number of years later, that was the year that was the date, the 20th of Kislev, that the Tanya was printed for the first time. And there's a history behind it. First it was given out, first the Alter Rebbe said the Tanya orally, then it was given out in a written form, and then it was finally printed. That made it more permanent, and that was spread. And as a result of that, tens of thousands of people became more involved in studying Hasidus and following the Hasidic movement. In 1798, the 9th of Kislev and the 20th, that was the day the Alter Rebbe was released from jail. Alter Rebbe was also arrested because the people who opposed Hasidus filed a false accusation against him. And this is Russia, this wasn't the United States of America. And when these things were filed, their lives were literally in danger. And eventually, the Alter Rebbe miraculously went out of jail, and that became a very big yontif. The 27th of Kislev and the 29th of Kislev, as you see, is 2 years later. After the Alter Rebbe went out of jail and was released, another attempt was made, and he was arrested a second time. And a second time he was released from jail. So we have a second yontif. So as a result of all these dates, every one of them has a history behind it. It's called a Hasidic month. It also has another name. It's called a month of redemption. First of all, we have Hanukkah this month. That was a redemption for the Jews in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. And then we have the day that the second Rebbe of Chabad went out of jail, number 5 on the list. That's one redemption. Then we have the day that the Alter Rebbe went out of jail, number 9. That's a second redemption. And then number 10 and 11 were the 2 days that the Alter Rebbe went out of jail a second time, also in the same month. So it's a month of redemption. And therefore, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is a month that we celebrate the great miracle that happened to the Rebbe, fits right in like a glove. So let's talk about what actually happened. First of all, I just want to give a little introduction. This question comes up and came up in the previous years. So I want to say this on the onset. Some people ask, what are we celebrating now? I mean, when the Rebbe was healthy and strong, and as a result of this miracle, he kept doing what he did. Okay, I can understand it. But now, what are we celebrating? But the truth is, the same question could be about all the major holidays in Torah. We celebrate the exodus of Egypt, but then the Yidden went back into Galus later. We celebrate the story of Hanukkah, and after that, we had all sorts of problems with other nations. And we celebrate the holiday of Purim, because whenever there's a holiday, first of all, we have to thank Hashem for whatever happened then. And second of all, physically, it's something which didn't last forever. But spiritually, something happened on that day that has a permanent effect on the world, and especially on the Jewish people, and on everything related to Yiddishkeit. So in order to get a little bit of context of what had happened to the Rebbe physically was very strong, like a lion. You can't compare it to the other Rebbes of Chabad. Just to give an example, the Mittler Rebbe had a heart condition since he was born, since he was a child. He had some condition with his lung. There were a number of times that he had fainted, and he lived to the age of 54 because of all these conditions. The Rebbe Marash, which was the 4th Rebbe of Chabad, he was also not well physically. He passed away at age 48, very young age. The Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe of Chabad, and when the previous Rebbe, his son, was 9 years old, his health was in such a state that he already wrote a will and about how we should conduct ourselves after it happens and what should happen to his son, because his life was it was so critical. And a number of years later, I think the Rebbe Rashab was then at age 47, the doctors gave up hope on him, and the Rebbe Rashab already made plans to go to Israel and to live whatever's left in Israel. He wanted to appoint the previous Rebbe to take over leadership in Russia, and then miraculously he recovered, and he lived for another 23 years. So the Rebbe Rashab also wasn't that healthy. The Frierdiker Rebbe, you also probably saw the pictures. When he came to America, he was 60 years old and was already in a wheelchair. As a result of, he was arrested by the communists, and he was tortured and suffered tremendously. And as a result of that, he was not well physically. The Rebbe was very different. The Rebbe was, like I said, very physically very strong. The Rebbe's schedule was beyond human comprehension. Even a person who's a president of the United States of America takes time off to play golf, go on a vacation. And by the way, even the Rebbes of Chabad would go away on a vacation from time to time and go away somewhere where nobody would bother them, and they had time to go in a different place, in a quiet, more peaceful place. The Rebbe never went on any vacation, day in, day out, all the years of his leadership. And 3 nights a week, the Rebbe would meet with people. Sometimes it finished 3 in the morning, sometimes 4 in the morning, and sometimes 5 in the morning. And that was 3 nights a week on a regular basis. The Rebbe would fast quite a few times throughout the month. The Rebbe would go to the ohel and stand on his feet for hours. The Rebbe had farbrengens that lasted till 3 in the morning. In general, to speak for hours and hours and hours is draining. The Rebbe's voice actually got stronger as he kept talking. And the Rebbe would give out kosher bracha. You saw videos the Rebbe distributing wine. Those lines were for hours, 3-4 hours, just distributing wine and speaking to people that walked by. So when this happened, that the Rebbe didn't feel well, it was like a shock to everyone. And it's interesting that after the Rebbe had this incident with a heart attack, it was discovered that a number of years earlier, in 1964, the Rebbe had a heart attack then, but no one knew about it. The Rebbe and his doctor dealt with it themselves. It was totally not known to the public. In fact, the only thing that happened then was that the Rebbe would see people 3 nights a week, and it was changed to 2 nights a week. No one had any idea why. In fact, that was the year that Rebbe Tzimchana passed away. So everyone thought that the Rebbe is spending more time learning things in her memory and spending more time on that. But no one realized this was the Rebbe had a heart attack that year. But it didn't affect any of the things the Rebbe was doing. So this took place during the Hakafas. It was the dancing and singing in honor of Simchas Torah. As we know, the Rebbe would stand in the front of the shul, and there were thousands of people, full 770. And the Rebbe in front of the shul would lead the singing with his hand. And every time one of the circles ended, the Rebbe would turn around and start a new one. This was the 4th Hakafah, the 4th time around. The Rebbe turned around, started to sing. The Rebbe was clapping his hand. And suddenly I saw something which I should never, ever see in my life again. The Rebbe's face just turned white, pale. It was like somebody would draw down a white window shade, just go like that. The face became white. The Rebbe turned around, asked for a chair. And of course, everybody realized the Rebbe wasn't feeling well. There were some doctors amongst the Chassidim that were there, and they ran over. But the Rebbe insisted that he's not leaving the shul and wants to finish the dancing. And we know that so many tens of thousands of people would ask the Rebbe advice and medical advice. The Rebbe knew good and well what was going on, but nevertheless, he wanted to finish the dancing. And the first of the 7 and the 7th, the Rebbe would dance himself with his brother-in-law. So the Rebbe insisted that he's going to go down the stairs, go to the middle of the shul, and they'll dance together. The brother-in-law, who saw what was going on, as they did 1 or 2, 3 times turning around, he said he's tired, he can't anymore, and the Rebbe stopped. He went upstairs, not an elevator, the Rebbe walked up the stairs, it was Yom Tov, and they wanted the doctors to come in to examine him. The Rebbe says, first he wants to make Kiddush. I'll soon explain all this. He went into the sukkah, so they said, maybe grape juice, it's lighter than wine. The Rebbe said, I'll make Kiddush on grape juice, so give me wine. So they gave Rebbe wine. And after the Rebbe made Kiddush and ate something, by this time the Rebbitzin, someone went to the Rebbe's house and told the Rebbitzin what's going on. She came. The Rebbe went to his room, and then the Rebbe allowed the doctors to come in and to examine him. And of course, they realized right away the Rebbe had a heart attack. The Rebbe's instructions was, because everybody was outside, when we saw what was happening, everyone felt the shul is packed. There's no air, so everybody ran outside. So there should be air in the shul. And they're waiting to hear what's happening. And the Rebbe gave instructions. Everybody should go home to their families, eat their meal, enjoy the yontif, not to worry. Of course, many people went home and many people still stayed around. During the night, they called various doctors, heart specialists, cardiologists. But there was a problem. The Rebbe said he's not going to the hospital. He's staying here and he wants to be treated here in his room in 770. And there were a few doctors that got very angry. Some of them were not so nice. And they basically said, if you don't want to go to the hospital, I'm not taking any responsibility, goodbye. And they left. And these doctors were doctors that people knew personally. It was their cardiologist. So they asked him to, it was the middle of the night, to do a favor, come running to 770. They left, they were upset. But the Rebbe insisted. At the end, there was a doctor in Chicago. His name was Dr. Ira Weiss, who was connected to Chabad. And he agreed to come, and he flew in from Chicago. This is what happened during our coverage. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, the Rebbe had a second heart attack, and that was massive. At the time, and even over the years, no one really knew. Just recently, it became known that that second heart attack was so massive that the end was sort of almost imminent. They didn't know if it might happen any second. That's how massive it was. And Dr. Weiss said, I agreed to come. If that's what the Rebbe wants, I'll go along with it. But you have to bring me all the equipment that we need. And they had the room equipped with pretty much whatever you have in an ICU unit. They went to hospitals, they used their connections. And within the next few hours, they had all the equipment that was necessary. And the doctors were still insisting. Hospital, and the Rebbe said no. They tried, maybe if the rabbis will give a halachic ruling that the Rebbe must go to the hospital, he'll go. So someone came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe sensed right away where he's going and said, don't give me any messages. I'm not going to go against any word of rabbis, but I'm not leaving. I'm not going to any hospital. There was a point when the Rebbe had the massive heart attack. They also gave the Rebbe an injection. When a person, God forbid, has a heart attack, they give an injection. They should sleep so the heart has a chance to calm down. The Rebbe slept for 4 hours. Usually people sleep for 15, 16 hours. So they told the Rebbetzin that the Rebbe only slept 4 hours. When she heard that, she said, 4 hours? He never slept so much in his life. The Rebbe hardly slept. But this I heard from someone who was standing there when that happened, that one of the doctors said to the Rebbe, now that the Rebbe is sleeping, we can take him to the hospital. I want you to know that the situation is critical, and you're the only one that can give us permission. And if you don't, if this and this happens, he spelled it out, as doctors always do, then you should know that you're responsible. She was like stunned. And he told me that Rebbetzin turned around. She faced the wall for a moment. And then she turned around and she said, I never did anything different than what my husband wants, and I'm not going to do it now. He's not going. And she was very strong. So the Rebbe did not go to the hospital. And one of the people argued with the Rebbe, if one of your Hasidim would have this condition and they would ask you what to do, wouldn't you tell them to go to the hospital? And the Rebbe said, what, would they listen to me? She said, of course they would. So listen to me now also. I'm not going to the hospital. Dr. Weiss, I once heard him speak. He was this doctor, and he said that most people with such a heart condition, they're not conscious. If they are conscious, they're hardly able to be aware of what's going on. The Rebbe was giving them advice, telling them things about his condition. He never had a patient like that. He gave a very interesting analogy. He said a mountain, I said most people, I treat people who are celebrities, people are very important people, heads of countries or heads of states. And he said, when you treat them as a patient, you realize, they're just as human as everybody else. They have all the human fears and all the human weaknesses. But the Rebbe said, he used the analogy of a mountain. When you look from the distance, you see something very high. The closer you get, the bigger it becomes. The more he got closer to the Rebbe, the more he was amazed at what he saw. And one of the things that happened also was that there was, of course, a lot of noise coming from the shul because the Rebbe insisted they should continue with the dancing. And the doctor said, no, it has to be quiet. And the Rebbe said to me, the dancing and the singing is like sweet music. And I want us to stay. So all this time, the Rebbe was conscious, telling them what to do, asking them questions. And the Rebbe asked the doctors, when you take blood, when you draw blood, the clock, not again. When you draw blood, I didn't even get off the ground yet. When you draw blood, what causes the blood to come out? Is it the needle or is the vacuum in the needle? So it's the vacuum. So the Rebbe said that Rabbi Groner should give this over to the Chassidim, that when there's a vacuum, you should realize the purpose is that it should be filled up with something more than what you had before. So the fact that there's a vacuum now, because they had it for bringing downstairs, the Rebbe's chair was there, but it was empty, so it's a vacuum. But ultimately, as a result of this, there'll be greater things happening. And this is all during Yontif. Once Yontif was over, the Rebbe told the doctor that he wants to speak to the Chassidim. He's in his room, he'll set up a microphone, and he'll speak to the Chassidim on the microphone. But for a heart patient, everyone knows it's stress on the heart to speak. So they didn't want to. And the Rebbe, it was very interesting. There's a lot of things that they didn't want to, and the Rebbe wanted. And even though the Rebbe wanted, he always wanted that they should agree as doctors that it's okay. It was a struggle, but at the end they agreed. So they agreed that the Rebbe could speak for 5 minutes. And of course, all the Chassidim were very excited because we can hear the Rebbe speak after not knowing what's really happening. And the Rebbe spoke for 20 minutes instead of 5 minutes. And it's interesting, and this is one of the points I wanted to bring out, but we don't have the time for it. We'll have to continue tomorrow somewhere. The Rebbe started his talk by saying, not saying there was a heart attack and it was this. He started saying that because of various reasons, this Farbrengen, which is usually on Yontiv, is taking place now after Yontiv. And the advantage is that it's on a microphone and it could be heard all around the world, and all the people around the world could be united. In other words, he immediately started with what's the positive thing that came out of this event that happened. As soon as Yontif was over, the Rebbe asked for the letters that came over the Yontif. He wants to answer the letters. And the doctor said, Rebbe, you have to relax a little bit. We will give you the letters. You take a week or two, and then later we'll give you the letters. So the Rebbe said, but then it's going to pile up. I'll have much more work. And also, the people who wrote letters, they need an answer now. They can't wait a week or two to get an answer. But the Rebbe insisted that they give him the letters, and he wants to answer the people, and that makes him feel better. In fact, the Rebbe told him to make an announcement that whoever wants to write should not refrain from writing. And he gave an explanation, which the doctors had to agree. That when a person is used to working a certain way or so hard, and you stop him, that actually weakens him. So the fact that the Rebbe is able to continue doing what he always wanted to do and always did, that gives him strength, not the opposite. So they had to agree. Another thing, which is where we see the Rebbe's approach to the whole thing was very positive and moving forward, and just sort of going above the situation, was when the doctor saw that the Rebbe wants to do this and he wants to do that. So one of the doctors wanted to slow the Rebbe down and said, are you aware that in 75% of the cases of such a heart attack, there's a reoccurrence? Happens again. The Rebbe didn't answer him. So he said, the Rebbe, did you hear what I said? He said, I heard what you said. You said that in 25% of the cases, it does not happen again. So you can hear two things. Either that 75% of the cases it happens, or the Rebbe heard in 25% of the cases it doesn't happen. And there were a lot of guests that came, as usual, for Yontif, and the Rebbe wanted to see all the guests. How's that possible? So the Rebbe said he'll sit by the table outside of his room, and everybody would just walk by, and the Rebbe would give him a bracha, and that's what happened. Right? Time is up. Tell me when the next speaker comes. Okay. So after the Rebbe was feeling better, the doctor said it's very important to walk, starting to walk. And the first time the Rebbe walked outside of 770 was to the building next door, which is the Rebbe's library. And at that time, something which was very precious to the Rebbe was that happened that the previous Rebbe had an enormous library. And when the war broke out in Poland, he left many boxes of his library books, Torah books, in I think it was in connected to the American embassy, but he left them there. Then came the war, and when he demanded that they ship the books back, he told them that everything was destroyed in the war and it's gone. As much as he requested and did research, they kept denying that it exists. That just a year or two earlier, someone discovered that it's all there. They found it. And there was a lot of negotiation between the United States and Poland that the Polish government should give it back. And they gave it back. And when did it arrive? It arrived during this time after Simchas Torah, and it came to the library. So the first place the Rebbe went to was to see these books in the library. And just to get an idea of how and what this meant to the Rebbe was there's a letter where he writes thank you to the lawyer who was involved with the negotiations. His name was Shustak. And the Rebbe writes him, I'm sorry that I delayed thanking you. But the Rebbe says, I was so emotional about this that I couldn't put my feelings into words. And I figured, let me wait a little bit until things calm down, and then I'll find the right words that I can express myself. But being that I see that nothing's changing, it's still the same overwhelming feeling. So I'm just going to write whatever I can write. So you see what it meant to the Rebbe. And then came the time where the doctor said the Rebbe can go home. Basically, this was like the Rebbe's hospital, so to speak. And the fact that the doctors say he can go home is like a person being discharged from the hospital, which marks a stage in their recovery. So that was Rosh Chodesh Kislev. That year was a Thursday night. And the Rebbe went home Thursday night about 7 o'clock. And Rosh Chodesh Kislev was on Thursday night and Friday. And naturally, all the Hasidim, the excitement was beyond words. There was dancing and singing and l'chaim, literally all night long. And someone recently said that he saw one of the doctors, talking about a doctor, not a chassid. And while this was going on, and the doctor started to talk to him and started to cry. He says, what are you crying? He says, I never in my life, such an outpour of emotion, never saw such a thing in my life. In other words, a chassid Rebbe relationship is not just teacher and student, an academic relationship. The Rebbe is a teacher, and he teaches us Torah, and he guides us how to act, how to conduct ourselves. But the relationship is also like parents and children. It's a love between the Rebbe and the chassid and the Rebbe. And what was seen that night, the outpour of emotion was the love that the Chassidim have to the Rebbe, and that when they heard that the Rebbe is well, the dancing was like nonstop, literally till the wee hours of the morning. And that's one of the big things that was obvious at the time when this all happened. But to make a long story short, I just want to say that one of the most fundamental principles in Hasidus is that whenever there's darkness, whenever there's a concealment, whenever something happens that's the opposite of light, ultimately it's not only that you get over it and break through it, but it brings a greater light. When the Alter Rebbe was in jail and released from jail, he began to reveal Hasidus in a way that he never did it before. And the same with the previous Rebbe. He was in jail in Russia, suffered, was tortured, became sick as a result of it. But after he came out of Russia, he began to spread Hasidus globally in a way that was never done by any other Rebbe before. And that's a result of the fact that the darkness always brings a greater light. And like the Rebbe says, when there's a vacuum, something's absent, that draws the blood. That brings something that was not there before. And the same happened with the Rebbe, that there's so many things that the Rebbe started to do, like after, for example, giving out the dollars and giving us an opportunity every week that we can actually face-to-face speak to the Rebbe, get a bracha from the Rebbe, and think of it, after such a massive heart attack, the Rebbe should be standing on his feet for hours and giving out dollars and giving brachas and relating to all the people that walk by with all their heartache, with all their aggravation, with all their pain. There's something that was a new door opened up to get these brachas, and a new door in terms of our relationship with the Rebbe. But I would think that on a much greater scale, after this incident, the Rebbe slowly began to introduce what we call today the Mashiach campaign, talking about the fact how the world is ready for Mashiach, and now all we need to do is the last sort of tie the loose ends to make it all happen. And that came only after all these things taken place. So there's a number of things that we could contemplate on and learn from when we think of the story of Rosh Chodesh Kislev. One is, like I said before, the love of the Hasidim to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe to the Chassid. And the other, because the Rebbe was very concerned that the Hasidim shouldn't be suffering, and he did everything to hide what he's going through from us, so we shouldn't be in pain. And we were doing everything, for the Rebbe's recovery. The second thing is learning from the Rebbe how the approach has to be a positive approach, and sort of go above the situation, try not to give any substance to the negativity and to the challenges. And if you do that, you can move ahead. And the third thing is the recognition how everything that is darkness, concealment, something blocking, ultimately gives me the opportunity to rise much higher and to reach higher heights on a personal level, and of course, in my serving Hashem, and to learn from this. So this is a little bit of the picture of what happened on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. There's so much more that we can talk about, but we'll have to find another opportunity. It's a Chassidish Chodesh, so there'll be a lot of Farbrengens, and hopefully we'll have more time, another opportunity to talk about that. And I think someone else waiting out there.
Wait, Robert,
What?
is there like a holistic explanation to what happened to the rabbi during like heart attack? Did he get a prophecy or?
You know that I can't reveal everything. You know that answer already. Okay.
Good question. I was curious about the same thing. Is it gonna be here? No, it's in the next room. Well, the next activity is in the back of the mirror room. Sorry. Oops, sorry. Oh my gosh.